A very good morning to you on this 12th day of September. It's a Friday morning, and if you're on your way to work or wherever you are, you have joined the Fifth Connection, where we talk through the storyline of the scriptures. This morning we are in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse number 18, and you will note that we do not rush through the telling of the story. This is not so much verse by verse exposition. It is just telling the story like it is. Tell it like it is what it's all about. This morning we are in the section looking at how we need to express amative awareness in the flow of reality. A loving awareness, because love has to do with sacrifice, a sacrificial awareness right inside of the flow of the reality in which we find ourselves. Because Paul is talking about this assembly inside of which we need to experience what he calls synchronicity. Synchronicity in the assembly has to do with God engaging with the people of God in the context of life. And in chapter 1, 2, and 3, the writer is talking about the plan for the assembly. In 4, 5, and 6 of the story, he's talking about the prompts for the assembly, the prompts that are to motivate us to action, to guide us into living in the flow of reality. Well, reality moves toward a destiny in chapter 1. It moves with vitality in chapter 2, and in chapter 3, it moves with great novelty and freshness. Paul is a custodian of the novelty. What novelty? The assembly. Jew-Gentile union inside of one body called church. The assembly of God, wherever it is found on the planet. And this is the novelty that Paul injects into the storyline. It is new, yet it is not new. Jew-Gentile salvation was known in the Old Testament, but God was primarily working through his elect nation. Note, his elected nation for a purpose, and the purpose was to birth the Messiah, but at the same time to be a light to the nations, to the Goyim. That's what Israel's function was. So Paul here in chapter 3 presents this mystery. What is a mystery? A sacred secret. A secret that now has been revealed. It's been uncovered. It's no longer a secret. And a secret that is revealed, of which he was a custodian. He was a custodian of this novelty, this new thing that God was doing, was called church, and inside of which there is Jew-Gentile union, where God has moved us from hostility to amity, from being enemies of God to being friends of God. And now in verse number 16 through 19, Paul is going to talk about this amative awareness in 16 to 19 that needs to be centered on love. Love is the platform from which we reach for wisdom. Wisdom cannot be taught. Wisdom can only be imbibed as we reach for it from this platform called love. Love is the affordance of choice. It is what is driven by personal voluntary sacrifice. That's what love is. And so we see that in this section of the text, Paul is going all out. And going all out in the sense in showing us what amative awareness looks like. Because you see, the left side of our brain constantly pans in. The right side pans out. Gives us the big picture. Gets us to see the whole on, the whole. The left hemisphere gets us to focus in on the part on, the fractal. And so there is this interplay between part and whole, panning in and panning out. That's how our brain works. Our brain works according to our stories work. And that's the wonder of it all, the beauty of it all. And so Paul goes into the text and he says that, listen, this wisdom cannot be imbibed except you and I understand what love is. And we are functioning in love. Verse 17, we are to be rooted and grounded in love. Verse 19, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. So verse 18, this line of the story is surrounded by knowing and experiencing what love is. What is love? It's the affordance of choice. Love is experiencing what it would cost me for the betterment of others. Because love has a price tag to it. It will cost me all I have. Personal voluntary sacrifice for the sake of others. Love is the affordance of choice. So in verse 16, Paul says, we need to move with power and strength in our innermost being. In verse 17, he says we need to move with Christ being at home in our hearts. And then in verse 18, he's going to talk to us about what I would call the fourth dimension. Because the text breaks off at the end of verse 17 with love. And it starts up in verse 19 with love. And sandwiched between the two verses, the verse lines of the story, is this dimension number 4. What's the fourth dimension? Paul says in verse 18, that you may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, and height, and depth. And then he chops it off. And then he switches back to love. Now, most would say he's talking about love at its height. But there's something more happening here. Because of the way he abruptly ends verse 18. And this has been a quiz, a puzzle for students of the scriptures throughout the centuries. What is the stuff that needs to be comprehended here? Well, some would say it's the cross, the work of the cross, because the cross has 4 points. The height, the depth, the length, and the breadth. 4 points of the cross. I think you stand in a lot better company in the text of the story when you look at verse number 10. Go back to verse 10. Paul is unfolding what innovative, skillful disclosure looks like before the unseen realm. Because the unseen realm is the invisible audience that's watching and getting to know what is happening. The church is the place where the manifold riches of the wisdom of God is made known. That's verse 10. And who's the audience? The rulers and authorities in heavenly places. Who are the participants? The church, verse 10. So that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might be made known. So that by the time you come down to verse number 18, Paul is talking about this mystery called church that is at peak performance before the unseen realm, because inside of that organic unity, God is displaying his manifold wisdom. And what is verse 18 explaining? The manifold wisdom of God, that we may move at strength with Christ in our hearts, dwelling in our hearts, with maximized capacity that is maximized sapientially. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is sapience. That we may have strength to comprehend, the energy to deeply understand with those who are differentially transformed. Who are they? The saints. The saints are part of this entity called church. They are differentially transformed. And they are the ones who are to comprehend what the full dimensions of optionality is. What is the full dimension of optionality? I want to suggest to you that it is wisdom, because wisdom is something that cannot be taught. It is something that it is experienced in the context of the real world. And wisdom can only be transmitted horizontally to those who are wise or who have woken up, according to Ephesians 5 and verse number 12. Arise, O sleeper, awake from the dead. Arise, O sleeper, awake from the dead, and Christ will give you light. He's talking to believers. Believers are to wake up. Arise, O sleeper. Awake, O sleeper. Arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. That's what he's talking about here. An awakening that has to do with reaching for wisdom. What is wisdom? Skillful living, skillful navigation in the midst of the flow of reality. That's what wisdom is. And I think you can make a strong case from the sister epistle of the story in Colossians, where Colossians talks about the same thing. The way you posture for wisdom is to move from a platform of love. The greatest of these is love, the biblical text says. The greatest of these is love. What does that mean? Love is the affordance of choice. And when you move from that platform, you will taste what wise living is all about. Knowing what to do and when to do it and how to execute it. It is appropriate action in the midst of what is really real. That's what the writer is all about in this section of the text. Are you tasting something of that? Maximized capacity for sapience, maximized capacity for wisdom. Oh, how we need wisdom. You cannot buy it. It cannot be taught. It is something you reach for from a place called love. What is love? Love is the final apologetic, Francis Schaeffer says, the basis from which we move to tell the world that we are the real thing. John 13, 34 and 35. Is that what you are experiencing? We've taken a deep dive into verse 18 this morning, and you may not agree with how I have unfolded the text here or told the story here, but you need to grapple with it for yourself. And if your bones have been rattled and you feel you need to run to your spiritual guru, the one who gives you, the one who has high explanatory power, who dispels all your uncertainties, your favorite Bible teacher, your favorite ism, your favorite systematic theology that you hide inside of, your favorite ideology. On this channel, we make every effort not to be given to ideologies and isms, but to view the scriptural text as the naked Bible. That's what Mike Heiser calls it, the naked Bible, without any post-biblical filters. Make every effort to grapple with the text in a pristine and a new way, because all of us bring filters to the text, presuppositions, assumptions that we have to do battle with. The platform here is love, from which you reach for wisdom. I trust that you would imbibe a good dose of wisdom today as you enjoy the Lord, as you walk in love, as the text further on in the episodes to come is going to unfold. I trust that you would enjoy the day today as you walk with God. Goodbye for now.